So hi, this is Patrick Pauls and my co-host,
Miraj Ali.
and we're both IT professionals here to talk to you about how technology can impact business. Each episode, we're going to bring you insightful interviews and the latest topics in technology and business.
Thanks for spending some time with us today on the Smartbridge podcast. Let's begin. This is episode 2 of the Smartbridge TechCast, where we bring back Anthony Lackey from ISS Facilities.
In this episode, Anthony talks about a little bit about the IT value model and basically how he was showing, not only did he show the value of IT to the business, but he wanted to make sure that the proper resources were available in the proper places to drive business.
Anthony also gave his advice to other organizations and high-level executives on how to successfully adopt the IT value model. Without further ado, let's get back into the interview with Anthony Lackey and Victor Lang from Smartbridge.
Whenever you're ready.
Hello, this is Victor Lang, Vice President of Enterprise Systems at Smartbridge. We're back actually with Anthony Lackey, the Senior VP of IT of ISS North America. He joined us earlier to talk about some key things regarding IT leadership and some of the transformational things that he's doing at ISS. And today, I'd like to bring him back actually to talk about the IT value model. It's something that he's very passionate about and he's implemented before. First off, I just really want to understand, Anthony, thank you first for coming. Mm-hmm. And really, what is the IT value model, and can you maybe describe how it works and what are the benefits?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, part of it is positioning the IT function to be viewed as something other than a cost center. I'll just start with that. So, too often, and I think this has its roots in the fact that we come through generally in most companies, as we do here at ISS, come through the CFO's office. In terms of our reporting, we're viewed as overhead in the cost center, et cetera. Now, there's a whole bunch of ways of how you can deal with that in terms of how you sell projects and so on, and the projects you go after and so forth. But putting that aside for a minute, the other big thing, the other big issue is how our costs are shared with the organization. Now, in many corporate organizations, and certainly all the ones that I've been in, historically, right, the IT costs are lumped together and then allocated out based on some arbitrary, well, not necessarily arbitrary, but also not representative of where the costs really are. Whether it's a percentage of revenue, number of employees, different business units, et cetera. And I remember back in the day when I first did this, which was about 18 years ago, when I put this in at my former company, I had inherited an IT department, and it was kind of the same thing. I mean, all our costs were pushed out as a percentage of revenue, and what that created is a challenge for the CIO on two levels, really. One, I found myself constantly battling with the different business units who were complaining about their share of the allocation and having to waste a lot of cycles justifying what we were doing, having conversations around that. Well, we don't use that. We shouldn't be charged for that. Well, the policy of the way we're doing the allocations is what it was, and I had no influence over that. But I had gone to, at the time, the chairman of our company and said I would like to establish a new model where we are treating IT as a business within our company and charging out all of our services as they are deployed. Because the second piece, besides that back and forth argument stuff that goes on, and the misunderstanding and the mistreatment around these allocations, is as particularly for infrastructure support type projects, whether it's your help desk or your IT support folks or even application support folks, it's always a challenge of having to go justify additional resources as the company grows, because it's just going to be a cost of business, and it is either way, but you end up kind of almost always behind the curve and having that gap in service until you're able to justify that added body, because as you're bringing it on, it's just more overhead for corporate, particularly if they're not doing allocations at all. And so the idea of establishing this IT as a business sort of formation is what we did. And I'll just describe the different technologies that were involved, because it solved a number of issues for us. We, at the time, now this is a long time ago, but we were a Lotus Note shop, and we developed a provisioning front-end tool in Lotus Notes, where we basically established a price point for every one of our products and services. And sitting behind Lotus Notes was the IBM Tivoli product, where we were doing automated provisioning and deprovisioning of systems across our entire platform on the basis of the selections that the users were making when they wanted something. So as an example, Victor, if you were going in and you were setting up Ross, say, as a new employee, right? So you go into the provisioning framework and you identify Ross. As you say, okay, Ross wants Microsoft Office, he wants Project, he needs access to JD Edwards, you're literally seeing what the cost of giving to those to Ross is right on your menu. Yeah. So you know what your costs are. And immediately when you submit that, you can see how that's going to change the cost to your business unit for doing it, right? And so what ends up happening is you change the model where the business users that are driving the solution are the ones making a business choice as to whether they need that function, right? And it really changed because the projects that were successful, the things people wanted to use, they were ordering and using. And as a result, we had an income stream to fund them. When we added another 250 users because of an acquisition or growth, we already had the revenue coming in to go hire that extra help desk person. I didn't have to go to the CFO or the head of HR to ask, because we were cost neutral, because the costs were being covered, by the organization, but driven by demand of what the organization wanted to do. Now, new initiatives had to be sold, et cetera, but even the way those were pushed out in terms of costing, it was fair. And it did two things for us. One, it eliminated that begging for positions and justifying expansion, because the business was driving that for us. And the second thing it eliminated is I'm being unfairly charged. Yeah. Because all we had to do was really explain how our base costs were, which were fair. We weren't making a profit. And that's what the costs were. And they were making the decisions on what services they wanted to use, whether it was video conferencing or certain applications, or some of our proprietary apps if they wanted more users, and it necessitated, Citrix CALs or whatever. They were picking up the cost of that. And it also helped with our license compliance as well. We didn't end up with a lot of stale licenses, because if somebody didn't want it and they weren't using it, they would turn it off. And then the next time we rationalized our licenses, we needed 5 fewer. We wouldn't retain those.
So it sounds like, let's say I'm the head of HR, and I just brought in a new payroll analyst, and this person, she needs to use Excel. So when I say, Sarah needs to use Excel, there's a charge associated with that,
right,
that goes into IT. So that makes me think that the business, either whether it be the business of an HR department or the accounting department, they need to think differently about IT, right? They need to think differently about how they're using those resources. Was there any challenges with changing that mindset with those people, or how did you sell that, I guess?
No, that was very well received because everybody wanted transparency. This predated transparency as we know it today, because this was a long time ago. But people were looking for that transparency and control, because before they were just getting one lump sum number. Had no idea really how it was kind of derived or whatever, just hit their P&L.
And no more arguing about this was how much is allocated to me because of this and that. This is very clear to them. I hired Sarah. I need Sarah to use Excel. That's how much I'm being charged because of that.
Right. You were using the MicroStrategy app or whatever we might have had at the time, and even some of our custom written apps. If they had users, that's how we allocated those expenses as well. That worked really well. You couple that with an automated provisioning system on the back end. It was really cool because we could provision a user in literally an hour from the time somebody made a request. Everything would be set up. I mean, that's unheard of, and this was 20 years ago. But to be able, so there was a lot of benefits of that just framework in general. But the big one for the users was the empowerment and the transparency, and then that was for them. And then for us, it was eliminating a lot of the noise and empowering us to staff and purchase based on demand. It also forced us to be competitive. You know, because often you can look at an internal IT department, probably not too dissimilar from a large public entity that could get very inefficient, right? Because you're basically a monopoly. People have to use your services. We had people pricing us all the time. So it was very important that we kept our prices in line, particularly as some of the online services started to emerge, that our price model was consistent. So it forced us to make sure we were efficient in all the areas where we were doing service. Because somebody looked at it and said, this is crazy. I can go get this over here for a third of that price.
Right. So you're actually competing with potentially outsourcing options for that department. If they wanted to say, I need to implement a new HR payroll dashboard or a new accounts payable dashboard so I can see what my receivables or my payments are, then they're going to say, how much does it cost if I go with IT, and how much would it cost?
Well, they didn't really have that option. I mean, they were a captive customer, but on the other hand, there were many instances where we would get those numbers when they were challenging, and we knew they were, so we knew they would, because that's kind of how it had always been. But it was important for us to do that internally to make sure we remained price competitive. I mean, even I wrote my master's thesis on the cost of desktop computing, just as an example. So I was very familiar with how much desktop computing in a distributed model really ultimately cost, and that's one of the reasons we had put in an enterprise version of Citrix and virtualized all of our applications on this framework as well. So that was a part of that. But my point to that one is, knowing that our prices were good, your span of coverage for techs over the number of users you have. What we were doing in the mobile space at that time. I think in those days it was BlackBerries, and I can't remember what the devices were, but this was a long time ago. The Palm Pilots, if you recall those guys. That's how far back this goes. But absolutely, yeah, it was about making sure we were putting out a product that was fair and reasonably priced.
So not only does it seem like you're providing the transparency, but you're also providing competitiveness in your IT. So you're actually optimizing your IT costs at the same time. You're actually providing that cost transparency to your stakeholders. How does that work in terms of...
Oh, by the way, just real quick too. So, I mean, even if it was third-party services delivered, they were billed through this as well. So this wasn't just internal services, it was external ones as well. So it was all getting pushed through the same channel.
Okay, so then you actually incorporated the third-party service as part of that. So, I mean, to me, it seems like almost you're turning the tables now, right? Because no longer is IT viewed as a cost center. You're actually making revenue. Is that, in some ways, is that how it's viewed upon in the way that you've kind of maybe changed how your P&L is looked at?
Well, yes and no. I mean, obviously, it's not real revenue.
Right.
I mean, right. And we still needed to be frugal in terms of what we were doing, because at the end of the day, it was pushing costs to the business either way. Right, so we still had to justify the new projects and be good stewards of the company's money. But the table that got really turned, I think, is more around those incremental decisions they're making about what they want to use and don't want to use and need in their local area, knowing that they're paying for what they're getting and they're not paying for anything more. And that's a very powerful thing, in my opinion. It was a challenge, though, I have to be honest with you. When we centralized everything to Citrix, we took a lot of the costs that were formerly buried on depreciation schedules for desktops and servers out in their branches, and they didn't see any of their license costs before, but it was out there. That kind of stuff now all of a sudden got kind of put up into a number. And so in the beginning stages, it was a little challenging to explain, why it was $100 or $95 was the base price for a user on the platform. So we had to do something, you said, education in the beginning to justify that starting point. But once everybody got comfortable that, the costs were representative and properly allocated to different services we were delivering, a lot of the noise went away.
Right, like something like I was thinking, like as as common as email that everyone is used to having access. Now they're actually seeing, it actually costs me this much to have access to email.
No, you're absolutely right, and that's where the difference comes in, because in the past. I'll give you probably a good one would be something like Microsoft Project, right? or even at the time Access, because it wasn't bundled in with Office in the initial days, as I recall. They'd say, "Oh, just give them Project 2." Back in the day, right? Mm-hmm. Well, now they see Project is going to be another $14 a month. Yeah. And they're like,
does he really need it?
They only use it once a month and once a quarter, once a year. I'm not going to waste $14 on that. I know that sounds trivial, but it's all those little decisions that make a difference. And like you said, when you don't have visibility to that and all you're doing is filling out a capital expenditure request form, sending it in, checking a bunch of boxes, well, give them everything they're new.
Yeah.
Right? Now you just spent a whole bunch of money. It's kind of sitting out there and you have no visibility to that at all. It's just another thing in your, in your depreciation schedule that is just a number.
Mm-hmm. And then they wonder later on why they're getting charged so much for their allocation. So you alluded to this a bit about getting that foundation established. How would you have any advice or any recommendations? What are the gotchas if other executives, CIOs out there want to transition to a model like this and adopt it? What are the things that you would give them as far as advice and things they might have to deal with?
I'd probably first and foremost make sure you're running an efficient operation, which whether you do this or not, you certainly should be looking at that. I would couple it with an automated provisioning solution if you can do that. We haven't done that here yet at ISS, and we're currently not implementing this model either. I would engage, kind of similar to what we talked about in the last podcast about getting a hold of some champions and having some dialogue to see if there is the pain point. Now, they probably already know. If they're dealing with those arguments now, they probably already have that sense of, who the key stakeholders are to get behind this. The one risk you could run into, and you have to figure this out in your pricing, is, if you have some capital project that's pretty significant and you're allocating all of its costs without any kind of minimum at user level, and all of a sudden, some of the branches go, "No, we don't really need that anymore, don't need that anymore." Now you've got a deficit because you don't have enough licenses to cover your base cost. Mm-hmm. So it's a matter of how you structure that. And what we did there is on some of the bigger projects, probably our VoIP project that we had done, right? We put all 600 branches on VoIP. This was back in 2000, pretty early for that, a Cisco platform. We had a base number that got pushed out to the division that covered kind of the fixed expenses for the project because they had pushed for the project, and then everything else was incremental. So separating kind of the sunk costs that you can't, that don't go away if you eliminate a branch or eliminate a user from the incremental costs that are user-based. So you have to model your data in a way to know, which ones are driven by more volume and which ones are going to be there no matter what. Because we made it for that.
So minimum cost that you pay just to have the power, the lights on, right? Mm-hmm. I still need to pay the electrical company a certain dollar, whether I use my electricity or not.
Right. Yeah, J.D. Edwards would be a good example, depending on how your licensing is, right? You've got some fixed infrastructure costs for J.D. Edwards, right? But the incremental licensing is more user-based, right? And the support is also kind of user-driven. If you had another 200 users using J.D. Edwards, you'd probably need another person in your help desk. I don't know, but so those costs would be put into pricing up that license. But the other costs maybe would be down at a division level based on the modules they're using. And those are not things they can say yes or no to. That's just the cost of the module. Using procurement, that's the cost.
Very, very, very good, Anthony. I think some of that is very compelling because when you mentioned to me that you got to make sure your own house is in order before you do something like this, I think it's an opportunity for a lot of IT departments to look at inefficiencies in their own costs and how they do things and then be able to make that transparent to everyone once they have it all straightened out. Speaking to that, though, what are some of those things that they need to capture as far as metrics, reporting? Like you mentioned, obviously, cost of the licensing. Is there some these things like you mentioned the provisioning system? Are there other processes or systems that need to be in place to kind of support this model?
Well, not really. If you have you can do it in a variety of tools, I suppose, but you need a front end tool. Kind of like if you ever went to Chili's and you do your pay your bill through their little deal. That's all you need. You could do that probably even as simple. I wouldn't do it in SharePoint, but some simple database to do the provisioning and capture that. Ideally, one that's tied directly into J.D. Edwards. So you're pulling the employee profile down and all that kind of stuff, or your HR system if you have a different HR system, and then take a look at some automated provisioning functions, which today you could probably do through APIs and stuff pretty easily. I mean, we couldn't do that kind of stuff then, but that's what we use Tivoli. But whether it's Active Directory provisioning or setting up a user in JD Edwards, the real trick, I have to say, that I do recall where we ran into a lot of challenges is setting up the role and data security in JD Edwards through that front-end Lotus Notes application at the time, just because of the complexity of JD Edwards security setup, right? So simple applications were easy. If they were single role based and, I need access to this company or whatever, but JD Edwards at the time and our internal payroll system had pretty complex, data requirements around that. So having a tool where you can build flexible forms to to conform to the software that you are provisioning for. So you need kind of a flexible data structure to be able to do that.
Absolutely. So I guess back to your restaurant example, I get a menu of what I can order. That could be email, that could be Outlook, that could be Excel, whatever it may be. But not everyone's menu is going to be the same, right? The different people are going to have different menus and different pricing based on who and what department they belong to.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Well, and even when you go down and I say I want to give Victor Lang access to JD Edwards, right? Now, the things that we're going to ask about JD Edwards in terms of your provisioning are not going to be the same. They're going to be much more elaborate and complex than if Victor wants access to Microsoft Project, right? SharePoint's got its own set of attributes you'd need to ask for, and it also handled changes as well. So if you went back in and want to make a change, you're doing net changes through that same tool. So it solved some real compliance issues for us as well around having documented approval of those types of requests, right? As well as any changes that were made. You had all that stored, all the metadata was stored, not the metadata, but all the transaction data was stored at that time in Lotus Notes. So there was a nice audit trail of, we added, Victor wanted access to JD Edwards. This is what he wanted access to. It was approved by the controller. It was provisioned at this time.
So it sounds like not only is it providing you cost transparency, but it's giving you the ability to also audit your licensing and know exactly who's using what and what licensing do I need to have as far as my company goes.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, thanks, Anthony. That was very interesting in terms of how you can really turn things around in your IT and actually make it not only transparent, but actually show the value that you're providing to all the departments. Very happy that you came in today and talked about that with us.
Thank you, Victor.
And that ends today's interview with Anthony Lackey. One of the things that stood out to me today in today's interview was how Anthony was able to refactor the company's IT strategy and views on technology to drive efficiency and bring value to the company. His past experiences, both good and bad, are able to bring value to companies now and shape IT in the future. From all of us here at Smartbridge TechCast, thank you for listening. If you'd like to find out more, you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, or the Smartbridge blog, where we talk about tools, techniques, and trends in the technology industry.
Now get out there and create something exceptional.